Hello everyone, today I want to discuss something that I addressed yesterday on the channel update video. The reason why I do this today instead of talking about history once again is that it's still about history, don't worry, after all, but from a somewhat different perspective. It's because I've just slept for 3 hours last night and I'm, half dead. But I thought, not to deliberate in this regard and pointing out something that objectively yesterday was talking about relatively to the broader discourse that we're having here. And as you read from the title, mostly about the relation between politics and war, right? Which up to this point actually we have addressed mostly in Clausewitzian terms, right? We discussed it in the appropriately historical videos, but mostly analyzed it naturally in the Clausewitzian ones, the Clausewitzian series that yesterday I didn't, stress enough how, overlooked it is, right, compared to the other videos. And I realize it. I know the reason why. It's simply less entertaining. But aside from that there is just von Clausewitz's picture there, doesn't change like the others. I think that if you're interested in the historical context I usually put out, uh, that series is really important, right? It's not just there for some eccentric reason, for some fixation of mine. It's really, and possibly, as we were saying yesterday, the most important part of Schwerpunkt, right? That takes the name of their famous Clausewitzian concept that should be in fact the punching line of the channel. And just I know it's pretty cryptic. Not every, I presume most people don't. Have heard of it, but really don't have bothered themselves with understanding what it is. And we still haven't arrived to the point of the phone call where we explained that. But it's very encompassing all the things I do on this channel. So that what yesterday perhaps I forgot to say is that aside from the broader connection that naturally exists in a general sense between all the contents, some of you actually corrected me before saying it's still content. Yeah, I wanted to stress the plurality of them. Let's say all the videos. Let's put it in this way, in the various topics. Yes, this is better. There is probably something deeper that I haven't addressed fully, right? Some of you has also asked me for further, explanation. Sometimes, when I came up with things, like geopolitics does not exist. Someone said, "Wait a minute, what?" Yeah, I truly mean that, and it's not like a provocative or extremistic or kind of irreverent remark. And I still owe that follower that I hope is still among us, because of course on this art, but following Schwerpunkt because he was actually a good follower and I liked him. And I owe an answer that I owe to all of you, because I think it's once again the reason why I do this whole thing. So today we speak specifically also of you and I, or better the fact that I am naturally this source of information, at this point source of sounds, let's say, of a lot of voice, a lot of talk that up to this point hasn't received much of a formal answer, let's say, aside from the sympathy, the subscriptions, and all this stuff. But it never happened to me to have a debate on YouTube, and I think it's something I would hate, because it would distract me from my agenda. As I told you, it's actually very psychologically stabilizing, so that would bother me. But I know at some point it will happen, because naturally touching certain specific topics would expose me to backlash, criticism of various sort, maybe even positive one, right? But it's something that we should start talking about in a more structured way, right? We may even introduce new types of contents on the channel regarding this, and beginning to talk naturally also about more recent historical events. And yeah, I hate as much as you things like, ah, no, the guy now wants to talk about modern politics. And it's not really about that, right? It's still in the realm of military history, but in a somewhat more, say, critical way, regarding to what is closer to us really impacts us, like in just in fact, a proper understanding of military history of warfare, we can better a lot of sides of our existence, of our experience on Earth. Um, I say this not once again to stress this as, look, war is incidentally something that, of course, by knowing better, would better our understanding of the world, right? I think everybody agrees about this. Yes, but it does it in a peculiar way. It is not peculiar because I'm just, I happen to be keen on this topic, or because naturally you would think people tend to overemphasize the importance of what they discuss, right? In general, if anything, just as a subject. That's objectively not that, right? And as you know, I always try to be as objective as I can, right? It's obvious that I fail like everybody because we all have our own, subjectivity attached to everything. But I firmly believe, from a kind of a objective, rational standpoint, or at least from my perception of it, that this is that war and its broader connections with politics and society are, and you have understood it by this point, right? I think it's something that filtrated, not just from the von Clausewitz videos, but probably also from the way I tell the story, right, of the past in many ways. That this connection is all one. It's the Clausewitzian Trinity, right? At some point we will have to make a video on the Clausewitzian Trinity proper, just to fix better the concept in here. That's why I need to introduce new, if you want, even theoretical topics. And please let me know just if you're interested in, like, I will probably do it the same, but I still care about giving you, like, let's say, properly testing the interest on this, because I presume that is also very interesting to know for me, and eventually I will explain you also why. So as we were saying before, Schwerpunkt now has been going on for almost 3 years, let's say 2 years and something of continuous uploading, concretely. And I've been repeating a lot of stuff, right? On certain aspects I've changed idea, and partially today's video has also something new to add to something, for example, I discussed not very long time ago, I think, about the relation between the video I made in the Historian playlist, which is called something like politics and history, specifically, like a strange couple, right? And war is history, right? In the properly disciplinary and nosological point of the question, that is to say, either we're military commanders from the field, or we study history on books, we study war in books. That's still history. That's still something that happened and that we have to research about and trying to reconstruct. So it derives from it that in many ways, we are now in fact to see the relation not between politics and history simply, but politics and war, as per title. And there are lots of things that in this fairly long time I have stated, which may have easily gone dispersed along the flow of the discussion, right? And it's therefore advisable for me to collect them here, to point them out, and to clarify them a little bit better. And this will probably escape the attention of probably most of you, but at least it will remain now fixed for future memory, and fortunately enough you to sense this stuff every once in a while around over time. I mean, 50 years will still, the content will still be here. People will listen to it, say, what the hell is this? And sorry for the length as usual. I try to make it as simple as I can, despite of the breadth of the topics, right? To maintain a certain logical link between one and another, right? So, first point, this channel deals with different topics that, as I was saying before, probably most of you have exchanged as merely historical, in the sense of the storytelling side of the story, in fact. But in theory, and this is what I hope for Schwerpunkt in the future, is that it will evolve more specifically, because it's already about it fundamentally, but it still has to take its own time to fully develop, with strategic culture, military art, and military history, right? And these are three different things. At some point we will have also to observe the distinction. And it goes without saying, if at least also the less perceptive of you will understand that these three topics are not unrelated and independent from one another, right? But they're actually one thing, one wall. And you would try to say, well, then find a word that can collect these concepts, right? And there is actually, it does exist, right? But using it would be interpreted, surely, and I'm very amused by this, by many of you, as a provocation or a source of useless and pernicious bewilderment. So that's why all of these introduction premise. According to you, what word is this, right? Well, I tell you, this word is politics. So I guess that you thought maybe of war or conflict or warfare, right? But it's really politics, right? Next point, why politics, right? And now, if you understood my Clausewitzian content here, you will know that I see war as an instrument of political activity. I consider in the political objective the inspiring spark of strategy in its first unavoidable moment. I believe political culture is the force that shapes strategic culture. I spot precisely in the political activity the origin of military art and military history. Then the instrumental condition of war with respect to politics can be left in the shade, but it'll never be cancelled, right? This is very important culturally speaking. Never forget it, right? This is Clausewitzian theory in a nutshell. It has to do essentially with the awareness that war, as always, is not an agent on its own, right? But it's just a tool in the hands of politics. And what's politics, right? It's the evil, corrupted politicians at the top. No, politics is really about every single human being and whichever choices this individual makes. War is the consequence of this. Even in here, I know if you've never maybe focused on the instrumental relation between politics and war, that's the heart of the Clausewitzian theory, and it is explained in the Formkrieg, as I will not repeat myself, given that we have already passed the point at the very beginning, which this is all properly explained. But you understand the implications of this, right? We live in a world in which objectively the instrumental condition of war relatively to politics is usually left in the shade, right? It's usually misunderstood. It's not seen, right? Most people, I don't think they actually rationalize it, or better, they obviously know that what makes war is that evil guy. Usually that's phrased like that, right? You know, what makes war is somewhat, you know, it's not to be investigated, the deeper reason, it's all about the corruption, right? It's all about the money, man. It's about that oil. Yeah, gonna get that, right? Whatever it is, it's not really like it. It is connected with lots of things like that, but it's not entirely it. But it's not even, simply it, right? It goes far beyond, and together with a lot of other things. In fact, it goes beyond. It's not my personal judgment of who knows what beyond what it goes, right? It's beyond literally what brings enormous systems like modern countries. Like it could be also the what's enormous, right? Even for probably the totalizing dimension of politics, as it's always been historically speaking important, like right that concerns the potential use of violence to settle certain matters, right? Or better, to simply use it, whatever the reason is, because everybody has a reason to make war, right? Everybody has, right? Wars do not break out because, some crazy guy decides it to be. The crazy guy necessitates, by definition, of at least half of plus one of the support of the people that he represents, right? And this is also something that this is what we're dramatically forgetting over and over, right? There is a disgusting apology that is being done, historically speaking, towards a lot of things. That is not just, you think the crazy guy, you think just about Hitler. Yes, that has to do with that, but that's valid for everybody. That's valid, actually, even for the for those that I believe myself actually had very good and reasons actually to make war, right? For those that we still revere justly, in my opinion, but that still should not be taken as that dichotomy of this was simply or the green or red light, and it's either right or wrong, or one is one thing is comparable to another, as if history kind of repeated itself, or it was told in a way that conceals some pure martyr that has been thrown a lot of mud on, and that everybody spits on, in retrospect. But it's not really true, man. That's all fantasy, right? There's a lot of this talk at every level. I must say, unfortunately, we live in a world. I'm just reflecting about this stuff recently, looking at chiefly looking at Europe, right? I past years I got myself interested in even in United States politics, and I find it very interesting, right? Very dramatic, sometimes quite, even amusing at some levels, but also, of course, very serious and important, and like I like politics can be, because that tells you the variety of it. But of course, by extraction, I tend to look more at what happens in Europe, and I see a lot of mess happening probably at the roots of these conceptions that do not make me think that the future will be such a bright one. Like, there could be some mitigating factor after all, that comes usually with wealth, that tends to make people less prone to to take arms at some levels, use violence, or to break the rules, but it's not just about it, right? This is not something that you can't stop to, it's a matter of wealth, or it's a matter, it doesn't stop to a monofactorial element. It also has deep roots that are properly historical, right? Never fall in the trap of thinking that there was a time back in history where everything was fine, where it was a society that worked, where the problems that existed at the time, we can say they're, different from today's, because of course they were different in their specific context, but they looked pretty much like in the same terms in which we address our own today. That they've always been chiefly about the same things, and these same things have to do exactly with relation between politics, society, and violence as well, right? And how the world balance is kept in a way than others. So there are very deep and complex philosophical, explanations of what the world could have become or not. I have my own ideas. I generally refute. I term them philosophical because that's what I see them like. I see them more like a personal opinion rather than a structurally, even just a methodologically coherent judgment. And that's also why I don't think of myself to be an intellectual, because I don't like it. I don't like the idea of it, right? I don't buy intellectualism. At least, being intellectual is a beautiful thing, but still, it shouldn't be the aim per se, right? It should, in many ways, be understood in an instrumental sense, even here, right? But I see the forgetfulness. I see the eternal mistake of ignorance and of the unavoidable canceling work of the past, right, of the time, actually, of that is probably it's probably the single most mercilessly constant things we can't see, right? Time washes everything away unavoidably, and we are somewhat doomed to, in fact, not to repeat history for what it's been, but not to assimilate really what we should be aware of. I think there is a very important step in human history that should be taken in the following centuries, that has to properly come to the acknowledgement that there is a real and concrete asset in widespread historical awareness, right? That it is a great investment, exactly from the Clausewitzian Trinitary perspective in this regard, that we cannot ignore anymore, right? And I think that there is a lot at stake, because historically, I don't think there was even the need. What was the point when people didn't even have civil rights to even think of historical awareness? People didn't have it, first of all, and that's also an explanation why we are now more, let's say, in absolute terms, maybe more interested in history and even more educated, for sure, but in relative terms, we are ever more ignorant about the connection that it exists between that awareness and how things work in the world. Something I've been reflecting on from a lot of time, and you see that awareness doesn't magically emerge from out of nothing, right? Of course, there could be even some, it's mostly we can't think of these things happening. In fact, that's why we're losing control on them. That there are random situations from which they can emerge, right? From which we can say, well, those conditions favored maybe a greater political awareness, but I fear it's not sufficient. I fear it's one of those moments in which you really have to intervene at some levels in properly imposing people to know history. And this is something extremely controversial, because obviously there will always be the voice that will rise and say, oh wow, this is just a matter of indoctrinating. And this is even ever more controversial if you understand the connection I'm trying to make here, of course, between history and politics. And it's interesting also because we have built, at least in the West, narrowly meant, because unfortunately not all what we think is Westerner from an objectively cultural point of view is, right? Historically speaking, it actually shares Western values, right? Being a Westerner is not where you happen to be born by chance, right? Voltaire said, right? It should be primarily a matter of education. And no, that's not a form of education you can get magically from just, parents that do not give a damn. Maybe probably about the historical side of it. It's very painful to say, because I think we all this encompasses all of us by a certain degree. There is no perfection in the world. There is no completion. There is not a person who can say, I know history, right? Your parents can be very good, can't do everything for you, but this asset is not magically created by good intentions, right? At every level of society. I'm talking about parenthood, but it could be about everything else in society, including education, in fact. And so I fear that it will become the usual and important clash, of course, between those who say, we should be either freer or less free or whatever. But I still believe strongly that that connection is to be taught. You don't want to teach, let's say, specific historical examples, so that you don't want to get the impression of being politicized. Well, then study the Volkskrieg. It is probably not history, and it doesn't properly talk about war in the let's say in a specific perspective, but tries to speak a universal language in order to explain it, right? And therefore shows what war can be in every circumstance, whichever culture finds it. That's also why culturalists hate von Clausewitz and can't accept that he simply outsmarts them, right? Because culturalists are properly the result of that ignorance that we're talking about, and that ignorance comes exactly from the denial that, after all, we talk about strategic culture, military art, military history, we're talking fundamentally about politics. We're talking about someone taking that step, right, and deciding to go at war or just to employ violence, right? This is the beauty of the Clausewitz, and that is very asymptotic as I began to define it from a time to another. So to the idea that war doesn't necessarily have to is by definition violence, right? It's not even the full organization of it. I mean, the way we fight it in reality has conventionally maybe some of it, but war is unconventional by definition, is asymmetrical by definition, right? And already on this lexicon, people, hang themselves, right? Because they have difficulties to realize that there is nothing like conventional warfare or symmetric warfare or geopolitics, for that matter. All things that have come, in fact, to exist just from some time, right? Talking about geopolitics, something that has its roots even in, importantly, in the 19th century. We'll have to talk about that, but it's still fundamentally wrong, and especially in the cuts we give it today, right? It is not to deny, for example, the geographical, the terrain influence in war, but we've seen it pretty well in the Volkskrieg to which level should regard that, specifically speaking. And mountains do not speak. Seas do not have political opinions. Humans happen to have. And that's where it all starts. Mountains do not make wars, nor seas do. So that's banal to mock these ideas in general, but I would say it's still important that we start accepting the rhetoric of it, or at least trying to understand essentially what this whole thing means and why. Once again, I explained these things in the Volkskrieg series, so if you're patient, you can go find them, and up to the point I will make a dedicated video in which I will be more explicit. I will make that video that will sound brutally like geopolitics does not exist, and I promise that I will explain you from beginning to the end why it is the case. Once again, it has nothing provocative in it, right? It's provocative for those who have never heard of such an idea, but it shouldn't, right? Because someone found that out way before today. It's not a novelty, right? That's what also partially embarrassing about this whole thing, is that, as we were saying before, time washes everything, including the awareness that there have been giants in our civilizations that wrote astonishingly beautiful things that nobody ever even reads. How many people have studied Kant's The Critic to Pure Reason? Right, those are those things that one would say why doesn't it happen? Why isn't this properly taught in schools? Why is that not on everybody's mind in a way or another? That would solve so many problems, and it doesn't matter how old that is. There is something in it that speaks a universal language, not because I decide or someone else decides to be the case, but because it properly does. Just like the Formkrieg. And that is the effort. As I was saying yesterday, today people have been convinced. I remember when I was a kid, that I don't want to speak bad about any brand or anything because I don't care. But in fact, I don't care. You remember that Megan Gale's advertisement said something about the Vodafone. It was about cell phone. Advertiser said the world, it says, the world revolves around you. I have nothing against nor Vodafone nor Megan Gale. Believe me. It's about the concept of it that really bothers me really pretty badly, right? It's the concept that, as I have already expressed elsewhere, you are not what that thing has made you believe. The world doesn't minimally revolve around you. In case you didn't notice, right? Because actually what most people do is to crazily revolve around the world, to pretend the world revolves around them. I don't know how it can be achieved, but properly speaking, that's exactly the point. You revolve around the world. You do it with your own difficulties, your own strengths and energies, right? That are, overwhelming and exhausting. And not only that, but there are a lot of other people that revolve around the world together with you. And they're not going to make you a favor, right? And especially in order to stand out from that, you should actually be special in some way, right? This idea that everybody is important now, every opinion is valued as on equal grounds, is a cancerous idea, right? There was a time in which people bothered themselves to make an enormous work, to make points, right? Just banally think, where does in your in the media broadly meant, on social networks and TV or whatever, where's the idea of that? Do you ever hear it? Like you have to be real, you have to really to struggle, to work very hard, to to make a lot of effort, to exhaust yourself. Nobody shows you that. Nobody even makes you think about that, because it's a very specific strategy to make you just accept, after all, that someone will do the work for you. That everything is always simpler, easier, right? As if life was easy in the first place, or you could make it be, or you could fake that up to the point at which something terrible happens, for which you're completely unprepared because you've never bothered yourself to create, some actual strength. I suspect the average person can be maybe very, resourceful at an individual level, but in terms of a built, structured capacity of reaction towards the adversities, we're terribly weak, and even more collectively so. Right. So if you ever wonder also why the connection between politics, war, and society is so important, because it has a lot to do with that. Now you would think that even the Clausewitzian theory is a matter of perspective, right? That is, that I'm presenting it to you, that at this point you have acknowledged it is a political position, even if if you already heard me speaking about this stuff, probably you know where I'm going with this. Whereas, others may think, still sorting out where is it going to lean left or right, what is his gain, right? It expresses a political position, and naturally also my personal political culture in many ways, right? Given this, dealing with war is, I think, understandably also dealing with politics, right? It's difficult to, as I was saying before, to deny that even at a very simple minded level, the connection between politics and war is there. Like most conspiracy theories and absurd stuff you read or read start from this. As I was saying, there is the evil guy from the evil country that you don't like, and you should be understanding why you don't like it. And civil rights, even if the country says officially otherwise, and then this cradle will keep preserving itself, and these people will also go to other countries. They will get married with foreigners that maybe know nothing about the country because, hey, studying history at this point has become useless. Who cares, right? And the person will bring that information. The other will start believing that because, after all, the politician he or she votes are, winking at that country from which, they take money from and all this stuff. And this goes over time, and there are entire cultures that are formed thinking that, after all, it wasn't that bad, right? Well, what you wanted totalitarianism really was, right? It wasn't much of a difference, right? What is dictatorship? Come on. What's an authoritarian regime, after all? How can you differentiate that, right, from another one, or another government? This is exactly, by the way, the same rhetorics that these forms of government usually employ to convince, not surprisingly, their people. And these things are not washed away easily, right? Almost all over Europe, up to a few generations ago, we had either fascism or communism. Think about it, right? This wasn't much of a, or socialism, if you prefer, right? But let's be honest. Do you think that these things are washed away, right? Because one wall crumbles. I'm an absolute fan of the fall of Berlin's Wall. I get, teary every time I think about that, but, that's another thing. But seriously, do you think that that's enough? That a country, is converted once again from one system to another, or that, if you massacred people in very large scale up to a couple of generations ago to your own world, or you discriminated them, by the way, because this is the same thing pretty much everywhere. You think your own world, after like 50, 70, 90 years, now is healed, right? I'm not one of those people who says, there is now such a great injustice everywhere. No, actually, we live in democracy for now, right? And it's a good thing, and our systems actually work from a formal point of view. But fortunately, in many ways, of course, they do not control people's minds, and people's minds change, so that theoretically, as it has already happened, a democratic country can transform itself democratically into a dictatorship, right? This is very easy to do, right? If you think that, after all, it's the people that has to rule. If the people vote for, the reduction of human rights, let it do. You say, well, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Yeah, I think that too. But it already exists somewhere. Things are improving, fortunately, and overwhelmingly, especially in the last 20 years all over the world in this regard. Yes, I believe that too. But we do not actually know how things can turn like, right? This is not to say, as I was saying before, to revert to what it was before, but to actually go beyond, right? If you look at history, it happened fairly frequently to see phases of relative, equality of, think about, classical Greece to the Hellenistic monarchies, right? And there is a great divide. Even the same thing about the same Roman Republic. It was never quite a democracy, but it was an oligarchy, but it transformed itself into a monarchy. Think about, the communal world transformed itself in a seigneurial world. There are events like this, right? And I think we live exactly in the moment of transition even now, right? There is much, it's difficult to put it in these terms, but of course that there are more imbalances, let's put it in this way, today that the world, say, 20 years ago in the West, right? We're talking about the West, right? Other countries are that messed up, yet you wouldn't believe if you didn't get interested in it. The countries you may go on vacations with are countries that are deporting hundreds of thousands of people, or are hanging people for things like adultery or homosexuality, things like that. Countries I repeat, you go on vacation to. Look at what is China doing to the Uyghur Turks, just for saying one thing, right? You can't really look, right? You take some, kind of journalist with a fairly low sense of personal safety to go check that out, but it's a thing. How many people care, right? There are those waves of hashtags on the internet or stuff like that go at waves. Remember when people said free Tibet? How many people say that now? It's not fashionable anymore, is it? Just telling you how malleable this whole thing is, right? The end of history illusion, if you don't know what it is, check it. It's not even about quoting Fukuyama, but it's properly realizing that just by thinking at episodes like World War II, how close we are, right, to the darkness. This has been a dramatic improvement. It's something that really got right, after all, in the recent times. But it's not that things are going to stay the same way, right, all the time. Ask, people in the 20s, they would think that in another 20 years something like what happened would actually happen, right? It's not so easy to do. Today is September the 11th. Remember something about that? I do. I remember. And I was just a kid, and it was one of those things that still makes me, like, at the time, it didn't impress me more than much, but it struck me in a way that if I think about it now, again, makes me shiver. I do accept it, but that was a very powerful thing to state in the first place. The world has changed, and there is a lot of relativism that is being done about this, right? Not just about those people said, it was an inside job. Those we would just spend a second. A minute of silence for their neurons, but I'm talking about the, putting the event in historical perspective on a time frame and thinking how the world has changed ever since. Right. I'm not one of those people that thinks politics even when he's looking at, a stone on the ground, right? But when we talk about war, just to go back on track, the thing is very different, right? September the 11th was an act of war, right? That's violence. Perfectly, I can say in the Clausewitzian sense, because von Clausewitz is describing just what reality is, right? So that's what war is in many ways. What's the point of this all? That I'm subtly trying to get you to join a party. Obviously not, right? I must say I repent all the times I attack certain specific political realities, even when they are objectively despicable, right? But I feel bad because I think I shouldn't do it, right? I should be subtler. I should be definitely way more intelligent to say the thing without pointing fingers at anyone, but exactly making you understand why it's not a matter of being a partisan, whichever political side, but properly being simply a morally, uh, objective person. This is a very different thing, right? From mixing all randomly and creating something completely new that you can try to sell somebody. Many people are doing this today, right? I could transform this channel in whichever political side stimulates me, and I will not be lying to you. Like I'm always very balanced. I criticize extreme positions, but I believe in my mindset that whichever side you take, there is always a way you tend to lean towards the extremism, right? Non-extremistic people, say minded people, politically speaking, do not exist according to me. I am myself capable of thinking some of the most horrible things, right? And even to say, well, let's hope it happens, right? And I realize it because it's human, right? It's not because I'm sick or twisted, or okay, maybe just a little bit, it can be, but it's fundamentally about human nature to just wander around the spectrum of the political aisle and say, well, what do I want really? And it's really an instrumental connection, because even in there, what is politics? It's not that you have to think yourself into an assembly when you think it this things. You just have that political opinion that very often transcends from whichever even political culture we're really talking about. That's the problem. That's how you can actually fish so much among uneducated people, because they are unaware of the enormous problem that just morally would crush you if you stop thinking about, if you start thinking about them for 1 second, right? And that's why the issue is so dramatically important after all. But I'm also aware in this regard that I cannot be completely unbiased, right? I cannot transform myself into just I can't say the thing, or I can't express my own opinion sometimes. And when we speak of war, this is the thing that probably will be more controversial to many ears, is that we are speaking of politics. So we're also at least transferring a political judgment into our own opinion. And the interesting thing is that it doesn't happen just when you talk about, I don't know, the Second World War, or I don't know, the American Civil War, or the Vietnam War, whatever. I don't know why I had to state all stuff in which the United States are involved, but that's just a compliment to the United States, not a note of the merit, actually. And that's actually why we should dramatically all study more and better Second World Wars, American Civil War, Vietnam War, because there are things in there that most people think they're aware of, and that most people think they know the story. They don't know anything about, not even the essential. They don't get even the essential right. Speaking of, well, actually, I was saying, speaking about my country, about Second World War, but actually my country was involved in very different measure in both of these 3 wars, actually. And importantly for my own country, but in different degrees from the others. The Second World War, surely my country was of importance. For the Civil War, a tiny bit. Vietnam War, almost known in the broader perspective, but still there was someone in there. And the point is, we are talking about, so these are very hot topics, right? This is interesting, and it's not that I mention these wars randomly. How are they hotly debated, right? I wish the Vietnam War was way more discussed than it is, because even the ultimate judgment has been settled in terms that I don't like at all, because I think the Vietnam War is of astonishing educational value for proving how conclusions are often subject to this dramatic subjective bias, right? And that not render justice to anybody who actually fought that war. Also because in that war everybody lost. Yeah. But still there is a difference in the way it happens. The Civil War, well, just think about current United States politics, that's pretty even. And the Second World War is also entered a little now, sadly all people who have been fighting in it are passing away. And this has entered a bit into the myth, right? Of course, I'm fully pro Western allies. I'm fully pro, whatever happened in that sense, except, war crimes existed from that side too, but at least, they were prosecuted, and of course there were way less. There is no comparison, generally speaking. That is to say that I don't condone anything just because it is from one side or the other, but I'm fully content with how World War II ended, except for maybe the eastern half of Europe, because that unfortunately had a set outcome. But in fact, there was much else after it that should be considered. Cold War is dramatically speaking, including with Vietnam included, Korea included, all the wars being fought, and in Afghanistan, in Africa, what we're talking about, even between China and Russia at the same time. And they fought against each other in the 70s. But aside from that, the point I was making is that Second World War is also dramatically overlooked in terms of how we have interiorized it, politically speaking, or better. Usually this is done in different ways, like that. The common narrative is the apologetical garbage one today, right? It's very popular among millennials and also among their parents, actually, that are the children of the silent generation that lived through those events. And that's also memento to what I was saying before, that is, you can't erase what happened, your own culture, your own country, just in a couple of generations, right? And don't think that certain things were over with World War II. Very few was over in the political morality of the whole thing. And in the ways, in fact, the world had to cope with the new reality of Cold War. There were lots of compromises that were actually happening in that regard, right? Germany had its Nuremberg trial, and it was a positive thing, but unfortunately it wasn't all, right? Germany was the Axis country that did the most in that regard to punish war crimes, but Italy didn't have it, for example, because Italy was needed in a very specific way from the United States to behave in a certain way. There was a lot of Italian Americans in the electorate. It was a very important issue. Not that the United States actually trusts Italy so much, and actually it's German merit if Italy entered in NATO and became one of the pillars of the Western of the Atlantic Alliance. Japan, not even. Right, they got 2 nukes, but let's be honest about it. These are still places where the 20 million Chinese exterminated during fascism are barely recognized. Lots of other war crimes, including the pleasure girls. I don't know how you say it in English, but that are denied. There is, generally speaking, a culture that is still somewhat very xenophobic. That doesn't really. I like Japan actually as a country, as a culture. I don't have I'm able to criticize it in this sense because I care about Japan, right? As a very important pawn of, in the broader Western world as we mean it today, technically speaking, although it's not Western world. But even in there were specific strategical reasons why Japan was treated the way it was, and naturally, lots of other things could be said about many other countries in Europe, including those who actually supported, for example, the Axis and didn't get punished, right? I'm not mentioning specific countries, but this actually involves way more countries than you imagine. And no, the fighting against Bolshevism is not an excuse for being a fascist, just in case you were wondering. because that's another apology is often made. Um, um, I could go on, but this is just for saying how also we perceive certain countries and their role in the last 80 years, for example, in the world, with very very debatable moral standards sometimes. And this is not about blaming them for having supported Nazism or fascism. I'm talking specifically about the historical narrative that is being put out, is being recollected also at a popular level. It's way more complex than that, right? It's not that cheap. Otherwise, I wouldn't talk about it. But the point that I care to make here is that you're involved in politics even by talking about prehistoric war. And indeed, perhaps above all, if you're talking about prehistoric war. And even in there, it's one of those most dramatically ideologized fields in history. Also because we know dramatically few about that, so there is something there that emerges from, aside from the evidence that is unfortunately, that doesn't help much to reach an objective judgment. Whichever, let's say, historical topic you like, most of the times reveals what you really think, right? I happen to, it happens for me to speak with people from different countries rather often, and I meet usually someone that has some historical opinion in that regard, and I'm very intrigued by that, because it turns out that I don't like prejudices and preconceived notions, but I must say the outcome is often very remarkably, the pattern, let's put it in these terms, is remarkably predictable in many ways, and that's also why I'm talking to you about this, because even banally, if you don't meet many people from other countries, you may not be aware of this, right? At that point, you understand it's not about ignorance, because maybe, I don't know, you didn't study enough, right? You may be a perfectly well-educated person not realizing that, right? Of course, one could debate what is a perfectly educated person, but which is also fairly, let's say, chimeric to define. Another realization we must make, first of all, is most people, even those who claim that they are actually interested or competent or keen on military history, have a very poor military historical, military artistical, say, or strategically cultural skill, right? This is unfortunately true. We have seen it many times. Lots of people now presume they know history, presume they know about warfare, because, I don't know, for years on the internet they've been reading stuff about war, so they kind of know the thing, right? They kind of know the parameters. Most of the times they kind of know just the cliches, right, that are incidentally political in the terms we have exposed above, and they keep repeating it. So the thing fuels, it's continuously fueled by this kind of rigged dynamic. But there is one thing in common that we all have, at least, and that's where we can start from to objectivize the problem, to become aware of the problem. That is, everybody, to a greater or lesser extent, maturely or chaotically, coherently or improvisedly, has a political culture, right? I think many of you are not aware of it, but at least I am, right? Being, you would meet those people say, I'm apolitical. I don't care about politics. I can tell it. Those are some of the most ideologized people usually you can find around, politically speaking. It's very easy to spot them, because that statement is usually, the premise for something else, right? Or the alleged justification or alibi or whatever you want to call it, right? To say, don't point the finger at me, but actually, if they need to say so, it's because there is a specific reason. Everybody has a political culture. Even if you say you're apolitical and you actually believe it, you have a political culture, because whatever that means it has an impact on reality, even in the way you approach politics, because that has a consequence eventually, how people are going to react to that, how many people are going to take that, and how they're going to exploit it. That is in many ways even unpredictable. And that's why also renouncing, for example, to even care to have a political culture is somewhat dangerous, because you are usually exposing yourself to the most immediate, radical, instinctual feelings about the thing. You don't train yourself to reason coldly, analytically about some, or at least trying to do it, and to structure, a more coherent and valid thinking, right? So the point gets to what I'm doing here with this channel that now contains, as we were saying before, 2,200 people, and has increased by 600 from 3 months ago, and that is presumably going to rise again. So everything I say here has potentially a higher weight than it had 1 year ago. You see how simple it is. It's not that I am much of a different person. Maybe, yes, I've learned something more along the way, but there's not a direct proportionality between the two things, right? I could have 150,000 subscribers tomorrow, which I'm also scared at the idea of, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily deserve them, right? Or that actually reflects my, quality of thinking. Look at how many subscribers Madonna has, or how many Mozart has on social media, right? And you can get the disproportion there of value that I don't think you can deny. It's not. I don't have anything against Madonna myself. It's just I think she makes terrible music, but many people like that. But whatever. Maybe she did something good, because after all, it's something she must have accomplished in order to have that following. But I mean, you can easily understand that the greater musician of all times has objectively not much of a following. Social media are not actually a very good indicator of quality in this regard. So don't even exchange mine in every sense for that, or anybody else's for that matter. So the point gets down to my own responsibility about what I say. So what do I have to guarantee, first of all, to this channel? Well, to my followers. Well, the first one is naturally to offer you a picture that should, let's say, open you to respect, and this is a very important point, without being morally relativistic at all. And I stress this at all because I'm very intolerant myself in this regard, but to respect the diversity of political cultures. Right? It's first of all something I have to do myself, because as I was saying yesterday, you do have different political cultures. We all have, right? And they are sometimes even very distant. Right? I've seen extremists of both sides of my channel. They're rare, but there are. And some of them are not even bad followers. That is to say, they don't, they keep to the tolerable. Others have already been blocked, of course. But that's something I don't like to do. And in fact, I've done it very few times. I can't even remember last time I blocked someone for something stupid they said. But I presume the greatest damage I could do to you and to the channel is to homologate it to a single political culture, right? And I understand that for many of you this is very difficult to accept and even to understand. Why? Because we all think, after all, as I was saying at the beginning, that there are the good guys and the bad guys, right? Now I cannot fully explain why I'm doing this. I believe there is, generally speaking, a balance that you have to achieve in this regard. That after all, You can't say there's not a right or a left anymore. You can't say that we've gone beyond. I think there are certain patterns that for which we are biologically programmed. It's really a matter of hormones, right? Usually, it's really a balance of that kind. It's usually also about life experience, overwhelmingly, I think, telling the truth. But I don't know. There are certain mechanisms that are really about pretty random for which the whole thing happens. But socially speaking, politically speaking, we have found a way to kind of, having these two sides, right, of the aisle that are constantly conflicting with each other, but from the sparks of the clash are able to produce some sort of civilization, right? Without conflict, human civilization would not exist by definition, right? Without the fall of man, there would have not been a civilization. Without Cain killing Abel, there would have not been properly a civilization. And yeah, that's messed up as it sounds, right? The Bible has an exceptionally anthropological vision and intelligence about human nature, and that's exactly how everything begins. And it begins without bitterness, because at that point Cain says, yeah, I've done it. Yet he doesn't even think in front of God, says, yes, it was me, right? He was broken by that. God doesn't even punish him properly. Like, he makes him go out there to the world. And what does Cain start to do after having killed his brother? He starts, learning crafts, building cities, right? That's civilization. That's naturally what all the concept of original sin and how violence and this innate violence and conflictuality is explained in that case biblically, but it's pretty spot on a scientific base. And it actually speaks in this sense for this case for accepting, for example, views that are different from your own. In case, for example, you don't have to believe in anything to appreciate the value of the Bible, right? I see it. This is a banal. It's never a banal example, but let's say many people do today, right? And it's as dogmatic as any other position can be. I don't read the Bible because I don't believe in God. What kind of connection is that, right? What kind of person would castrate himself to not read, one of the single most important works of mankind in the history of mankind, has influenced massively the whole history of civilization, whether you agree with what is written in it or not. So say, I don't read it. Fine, so you will remain ignorant your entire life about, most things that ever, actually have to do with your culture, with your, your artistical production as a civilization. You don't care. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here. Is to present you with the realization that you can't close your mind to an idea. I don't want Schwerpunkt to become a niche for a certain political side, which I've never conceived Schwerpunkt to be so. The contents may actually attract an unbalanced amount of people, usually for the conservative side, for which I also am, technically. But when I make this thing, I as you understand even here, I didn't even try. Where you say, oh, you just said the Bible is cool, you should all read it. I didn't say that the Bible is cool because I think, you should, convert, to catechesis, whatever. I've never even told you whether I believe in God or not. And you shouldn't care, right? As I don't care to say it on this channel, because I say it's pointless. Well, what's the difference? If I do or if I don't, right? I don't see what the importance is in this. But it could be anything else, right? I'm a conservative. For example, I don't like, let's say, communism at all, as I don't like fascism at all. But actually, I find Marx to be a pretty interesting read. The guy gets it wrong at so many levels, which every economist actually knows. But as every historian, by the way, gross mistakes, but hey, wouldn't you, you were born in the Western world, you don't read Marx, even, okay, you can't, maybe maybe you can't do that. It's not a big deal, but still, you know, let's read what's all about, right? Even if you're against it, because after all, what's it's a weapon more you can use, even in case you're going to combat that. There's an anecdote. One of my colleagues once told me that the world is communist. I don't know. They're still to be found somewhere. Actually, I'm speaking mostly to Americans that are seeing a resurgence of these things. But in my country, at least, fortunately, there's not been apparently much of a continuation of it. But there's still there's some guy that tries to give you papers of this stuff. It was it happened to me too. And this guy was approached by these people, and they told him, look, no, we're Marxists, Leninists, and he answered, no thanks, I'm a Trotskyist. So if you want to kid them, just learn how to be clever about it, because most of them are just that stupid, right? And it's so easy to get them. But not all of them are, because not all humans are, right? You can take, maybe there are some groups where people are smarter or less on average, but there's still always something very interesting to learn from other people. I've spoken to communists and fascists sometimes in very, civilized way, and we were respecting each other. And what's wrong with that? Or maybe I knew these people that for other reasons, and then I found out eventually that they were something like that, and for what maybe was concerning me at the point didn't matter to me, right? This often happens with family and friends. You discover strange things sometimes, but that's the point. That on social media, it's somewhat reassuring and comforting to participate in a group where everybody thinks the same, where we agree with each other, we collect likes, we inflate our ego, we pat on each other's shoulder. How useful is really that, right? There were statistics that said, that after all, people like drama, like conflict, like they maybe feel upset or stressed by them, but actually they still think it's useful, because it really sparked, if there wasn't any debate with anybody, civilization would die, right? It would be all like thermic death, and nobody would do anything about anything, right? That's why the fall of man happened, or at least we used to explain the matter like this, because this thing cannot be fixed. Sorry. That's why utopias are properly useless, because in political practice, because of course policy is negotiation, right? They can be interesting from a philosophical point of view, and that's why I told you to read even Marx, or to even read Mein Kampf. Have you ever read Mein Kampf? I confess I haven't, actually, but I have it. I could. And I've always, been into, and actually I know it's garbage from a literary point of view. Like, if you really want to read something, edgy in that kind, read the Gobineau, this once, but Hitler actually sucked at writing. But how much stress mounts in us while, for example, reading a post or a comment that we do not share, right? A criticism of our opinion, or worse, a scornful and sarcastic response. Oh, I felt in it often. Myself, I know what it feels like. We all share that, and that's the point I care also to show you that we're all in the same boat. We know what's the deal, right? We know what's the problem with this stuff, with the confrontation, all this stuff. I would say that Schwerpunkt is not a channel for personalities who cannot stand the stress of confrontation, either for weakness of character or the frailty of opinions, right? On the other hand, what is better to develop, your critical sense in your knowledge or your analytical skill than confronting yourself with different argued opinions, right? This is the point I'm trying to make, I guess. So there's another point that is tolerance. never been a great fan of tolerance in terms of, why should I take over me something that I really didn't ask for? I think of tolerance in this sense mostly in economical terms, but all reality can be described in economical terms. There is sometimes, actually most of the time, if not always, a good reason to be tolerant, especially if we want to achieve something in the first place. And I think we all realize it. But it's true that this is like a YouTube channel, so everyone has different priorities, their own reasons for impatience. For example, it's kind of natural to react badly in the face of a commonplace, to inconsistent and illogical reasoning, weak or baseless argumentation, childish attitude, arrogance, witty touchiness, more. I always do it, right? I'm easily bothered actually by most comments, I must say, without much of I'm fully honest. Like most of the stuff I read and see, and so if you wonder why I'm so polemical in general, it's because I think about that most of the times. At the fact that this low quality stuff repeats itself over and over and over again, and that is bothering. It's annoying, right? It's terribly, intolerable at some point. Also, and obviously, I don't correct, or rather, I don't intervene with my opinion every time I read something I disagree with. Right? Sometimes most of the times I lack time. I don't have time at this point, not even for inserting video, the video description, right? Most of the times, I also do not wish to intervene. It's boring. If I had to answer to everything, some questions are very bright and very intelligent, but they're also very rare. So all the rest of the times, I will just leave the person. It actually makes me sad when there is a question that I could answer, but I'm so tired, just like today, for example, without all the sleep I needed to wrap my mind around it. Right? I can't. Like, just writing video descriptions is terribly boring. And instead, I should use it because that's very useful also for getting more views from the YouTube search engine and so on. But I can't, I can sometimes barely make these videos. Today, I had to make something else, but I couldn't because I'm exhausted. So in reality, however, the truth regarding my attitude in here is that I must not intervene, right? This would risk being interpreted in the long run as the imposition of a truth, right? And you know perfectly well that I'm not an ethical relativist, therefore I'm convinced that the truth exists, it does exist, that it is not exclusive to the majority also. That's another thing we should quite clearly sculpt in our minds, that what the majority thinks is not a morally validating it's not, generally speaking, a scientifically validating fact, right? The majority very often is actually, as you've seen, pretty squalid, right? The majority has been wrong many times in history. However, I also believe that it cannot be simply ignored, right? And we can't be elitistic or thinking that since we are not part of the majority, we're better, right? I also believe that a process of approaching truth is possible where intellectual honesty and reason dominate, right? Then it is not human to always be intellectually honest and reasonable. And we must also keep this in mind, right? We can all make a mistake. And this is not to say asking for your forgiveness. Actually, I've never been asking for this. If not, it was an inconvenience of some sort that I could avoid. It was my fault, evidently. But phrasing it in another way, I cannot answer for every single thing I do, nor you can. So naturally this creates some problems, and that's why most of this is left to be handled by all of us together, right? And that's why things like politics and society are, after all, important. And that's why also tolerance is important, because without that we would be just absolutistic extremists, and we can't be that, independently from whether we are right or not. We all know we can't be cent for cent right in the first place, so that would be unjustified just, through this dialectical remark. On the other hand, some of you, sometimes, or most of you, interpret the link between politics and war in a way that goes beyond the limit that I consider tolerable. On the other hand, some of you sometimes interpret the link between politics and war in a way that goes beyond the limit that I consider tolerable. Right? It has rarely happened. That's why I blocked a few people after all. And more often, your political convictions push you to submit to the channel questions that belong to the vulgata of a real political part, right? Contents that, therefore, are decidedly incorrect from an historical point of view. Some are real fakes. But I should sanction these things independently from any other evaluation, precisely because they are false. It happens. So, one last aspect of this is that it always arises me a certain perplexity when some of you say, for example, we should get used to think that there is nothing like truly off topic from this channel's spectrum, right? There are political things I stated myself that, for example, have touched some people who had actually political, evidently political side. Just a few days ago, just one guy that followed me since a long time actually was, I don't say political side, is got annoyed by something I said about the video about caters and got offended, went away, right? And presumably the question was because he had already complained before, saying, you talk about things that have nothing to do with this and with that, but I don't think so. Like, if I start talking about this stuff when I'm discussing Byzantine history, you can't be sure that there is a connection with that, right? And that I don't, once again, this is not a channel for entertainment. This is not a channel for storytelling. This is a critical analysis of history and historical culture, right? And chiefly about military stuff that is, as we have seen, in turn connected with lots of other aspects. So there can't be properly something that is politically unacceptable when we discuss history. Maybe there's something historical that is not acceptable because it's politically manufactured. That's another thing, right? The difference is very subtle, actually, because as you understand, by definition here, we have accepted that everything historical is also political in a way, right? But we should also talk about the historical standards at this point, because where's the objectivity in that regard, and where's the the capacity to discern even between the historically correct thing and just the political propaganda, right? Sometimes it's not easy, and that's why I also make this video, because I presume many people want to enforce certain historical visions just because of ideological matters, right? And that's where the thing starts saying, look, historically speaking, this is wrong, and I prove you why it is. And when you realize the insistence from the other side, you can start understanding there's no real dialogue there. There's just a shut out to say, I am this, not history is, this is my history, right? and it's so naive sometimes. I'm kind of even disappointed because, after all, I presume that when I come talking here, I say things that mostly you don't find anywhere else. And part of the reason, of course, why this content sometimes is not understood, aside from the laziness and people don't listen to it all and think it's just another storytelling, it's not. It's that I say things that are rare to hear, right? And this is something that people struggle to understand. Because until they're not confronted with someone who says, look, this is blatantly wrong, they will not understand. So sometimes I've been challenged because I say I should give an answer that would make this person change his mind, right? But again, I have my own limits as well, of time, of will, sometimes even of competence. It happens someone posed a question that I had to look up, or that I thought was actually wrong in terms of how it was phrased, but I didn't have enough evidence at hand to show the thing to prove it wrong, because I should have made all a complex critical thing, and that's what I usually do in the videos, right? Most of my videos actually contain the criticism to the stuff I sometimes listen to. I wanted to make those questions and answers videos that I started collected questions for, but that I eventually I stopped. I mean, I could do it again at some point. I made one video like that, but it's really the questions sometimes are not so developed. Like either they could even be very simple actually, like why was this like that, and you rarely find them because most of the time the question is presuming to know something and trying to get the answer that you want. That is also not a good way of, and that's why even sometimes leaving unanswered is an answer that can't work, right? I think it's important to stress that as well. So sometimes silence is justified as well. So I can't contradict myself by saying that you shouldn't ask that, but still, obviously there are opinions that should be calculated, observed every time, right? I'm the administrator and moderator here, so it is my responsibility to interpret and enforce the rules that I have set myself. Like, I'm properly in charge here, right? At some point someone could overwhelm me from another direction, but at least what appears in here has naturally it's about what I decide to show, right? There is a lot of this in the work here that I also could bypass, but I have to at some level. So perhaps the very last thing is that you must accept by participating to Schwerpunkt that on this channel it's not my role as sole judge. That should therefore guarantee a human uniformity of judgment, which is hardly the case, but rather the fact that I do not want a group polarized on a single political idea that really matters, right? And I must try as much as possible to oppose the tendency towards political polarization of social networks, right? If anything, I would like them maybe to polarize as much as possible on the methodology of discussion, on the willingness to dialogue and confrontation and education and respect for the other. Then it is true that certain political ideas structurally lack the respect for the other, right? It's the same reason for, I don't know, for example, why that guy banned, right? Because if you cannot accept that your political idea will be at some point criticized, keep living in the bubble, right? And that's not very healthy for you. The bubble will explode at some point. You will have no shelter. You should build some skin there. So this is actually not even an exclusive character of those politically, say, extremistic ideas, because even in there are people that own kind of extremistic theories, but are actually way more moderate actually than other people who are allegedly moderate and then eventually do weird stuff. So on the other hand, I have to accept the consequences of my position, that is the criticism. I don't think I'm particularly touchy, right? I think more or less the average. I think in general I can't take criticism without too much problems. But I also usually I'm not particularly sensible to vanity of praise and compliments either. I can't afford both of them. I don't care, as I explained many times. Authority, that's an important thing, is gained day by day, right? Better, it is confirmed day by day. It's never acquired forever. There is never a source that is always right, is always authoritative, is always... especially in an area like this one, where competence in such a broad field of study, depth and lucidity of analysis must be demonstrated, right? But also the practical ability to exercise the duties of administrator and moderator. Believe me, it's not easy, right? I can't say I still sleep at night, or better, I don't sleep at night, as I told you, especially about last night. But I can't get with that. But let's assume the thing grows here, Schwerpunkt reaches thousands. The thing starts being heavy, because there's a lot of people who listen to me now, also that want to, right? If they follow, they listen, and I wanted to thank you also for the nice comments you left on yesterday's video about the Schwerpunkt's achievements. It's very appreciated, but always know that they remain within a very delicate frame that I have to handle together with you, right? So this is very important to me, and it should be very, very clear to anybody who wants to participate to the thing, right? Even if you never comment, or even if you're just following from outside YouTube, like you're not even a subscriber, just be aware that what I say here is based on these conceptions, that these things do not go away, that are not a matter of what I think about it. All this broader connection is present at all times, also out of here, right? Especially out of here. This is just a YouTube channel. There are very important things going on out there that require an enormous attention, which is not often gotten. Alright, so this was another hefty video that we managed to pull off at the end, but I care for it, right? So hopefully I will not make all this kind of videos in the future. I usually fall back on this generally methodological thing when I couldn't prepare well enough for another video, but they're actually very useful, I think, because they are probably more explanatory than lots of other things I can tell. Alright, so I stop it here, and I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time. See you next time. Bye.